I was just informed by Max Alvarez, the editor-in-chief at the Real News Network, and I just added that they will no longer run my show. The reason for the cancellation, he said, is that my critiques of Biden, especially for the genocide in Gaza, jeopardizes his nonprofit status. My last show with Dennis Kucinich, who is running as a independent for Congress in Ohio, was removed from the site. And the reason they signed Chris Hedges because he wrote this. Now, because his account is not always ran by him. When he signs his name, that means he actually wrote this tweet. So let's just go to a couple of reactions. Here is Aaron Mate. I just saw him, and Danny Haifong and Anya. We'll read the three of these people. Sorry to hear this, Chris. Your show is a dose of much-needed sanity, and your loyal audience will surely follow you to wherever it lands next. If critiquing Biden jeopardizes nonprofit status, that suggests that such status is given or taken away in an arbitrary and capricious manner based on the whims of those in power. That's the only way your critiques of somebody can affect that. What does that have to do with my nonprofit? Danny Haifon, this is awful, Chris. Your work is essential. We have to elevate and hold each other up in these times. Anya says, tremendous loss for them. Then let's get some other reaction. But before we get the other reaction, let's see what Real News, because they have to come out and make the announcement. They were gonna, and they got trashed as they should in the comments. So this is the Real News Network, and then we'll get to some. Nick also did a little short hotspot video on it. We're gonna cover that. And then we'll get to the George Galloway interview. We're not going to listen to the whole interview. We're only going to listen to the part about him being fired, because they also talk about Israel, and we can cover that part of the segment in a different stream. But let's read what the Real News Network says or said in their announcement of this, and I'll blow this up a little bit for my sake. I write to you, and it's using the word I, so obviously this is Max. I write to confirm that the Real News Network will unfortunately no longer be able to produce and co-publish the Chris Hedges report. All past episodes produced by the Real News Network are freely available on the Real News Network and Chris's Substack, and Chris has full rights to publish all other recorded and as yet unpublished episodes. For the past 2 years, the Real News Network non-monetary agreement with Chris entailed producing the Chris Hedges report for his independent Substack and the Real News Network. In exchange for each party, including Chris himself, having full publishing rights to the show, throughout the duration of that contract, Chris has not been able has not been an employee of the Real News Network. His income from the show has derived and will continue to derive from Substack, and the Real News Network has no intentions or ability to censor or suppress the show, nor to prevent Chris from continuing to produce the show. Chris has assured us and his audience that the show will continue. We are incredibly proud of the work we've done together. Not proud enough to keep him, because you're talking about past work. This work that you're saying you're proud of is the reason you're removing him. We are incredibly proud of the work we've done together with Chris over the past 2 years, and the episodes of the Chris Hedges report we produce together will remain on the Real News Network site, YouTube channel, and on Substack. Now, didn't Chris say the episode of Dennis Kucinich was removed? Didn't he say that in his tweet? And then he goes on to say, as editor-in-chief of the Real News Network, this difficult decision was mine alone, and it was a decision I made after exhausting all options to avoid it. And I've had Max Alvarez on. We had a pleasant interview. He seemed like a cool person. He and I both, I believe, understand that I'm to his left, he's to my right. But we still had a conversation because we were talking about uh Palestinian reporter who was killed, Rafat. And he knew Rafat, and I brought him on to kind of talk about the murder of Rafat. And we had a good conversation about that. We didn't go into any other sort of politics, but this is terrible. And I would say it to his face if he was here. If he was here for another interview, I would say this is terrible. This is not a good reflection on you. It's not a good reflection on the organization that you call the Real News Network. Like other people have said, I think the part that says real needs to be removed from the title of the name. This is no longer quite literally, you can no longer claim that as an accurate name. I don't maybe it was taken away long before this, but I'm just saying this event absolutely takes away the ability to call yourself the Real News Network when you're removing somebody for the news they reported on. So this is quite terrible. This is terrible. But let's continue with the statement. Chris Hedges needs to be free to be Chris Hedges, and he's got to be free to say what's in his heart without being restricted by working within a non-profit newsroom. I resolutely affirm that this decision had nothing to do with Chris' excellent and important coverage of vital issues, from Israel and the war on Gaza to the trial of Julian Assange, issues that matter deeply to our audience and entire team and our network of freelance contributors. Wait, what? This doesn't make sense here. What is he saying? I resolutely affirm that this decision has nothing to do with Chris' excellent and important coverage. What? What is he being fired for then? That this completely does not make any logical sense. What is the egregious item that he's being removed for then? What? We will continue our longstanding commitment to reporting on these issues and other stories. What does that even mean when you're removing the person? This is what social democrats do, though. They're able to fix their mouths and use words that don't describe what they're talking about, but it's radical words. They're able to look in the face of reality and say the opposite of what they're seeing with their own eyes with a straight face. I don't even understand, because up until this part, I thought he was being fired for his work. What is he being fired for then? They don't say. He just says it's not that. I am heartbroken to lose Chris as a colleague, but we remain comrades in the struggle for truth, justice, and life. I will forever cherish our conversations and chess games between recordings, our camaraderie, and our friendship. And I can't wait to see what this titan of journalism does next. With love and solidarity. This is how they're able. And it's so telling. Put this, Aaron, as the cover. It's so telling of this picture. It sort of illustrates what social democrats are willing to do in this game. They're willing to take out people who they call their comrades in the same community, in the same struggle, in order to stay in the good graces of the people we're fighting. So you're playing chess, but then when you win, you tell Chris to leave. That's your win? Pretty fucking despicable. And it's a very vague, a very intentionally vague, missing the most important detail, the why. He says it's not that, but he doesn't say what it is. Ajamu Baraka, and let's read a couple of reaction to this. Ajamu says, it turns out the real news is anything but that. Does anyone have a backbone and a set of principles anymore? The answer, Ajamu, is no. Not anyone It's certainly not anyone who wants to be in the good graces of the Democratic Party. Certainly not that. Dennis Kucinich says this: we are at a watershed moment. Censorship and intimidation are openly used in furtherance of ethnic cleansing and genocide. So grateful for the extraordinary courage of Chris Hedges and others who courageously stand for humanity at this grim hour. Let us remain steadfast. And kid you not, this is censorship. This is the billionaire class rubbing elbows with the U.S. empire to say we need to put clamps down on this. They're banning TikTok. They're sending and sicking the police state on protesters. They're suppressing RBN. All of our content, soon as it's uploaded, like this video right now, soon as we're on, it goes to limited, which limits the visibility. They're putting the clamp down and it's not going to work. That's Dennis Kucinich. Here is Nick's video, and this will kind of sum it up a little bit.
Chris Hedges' show was canceled on the Real News Network because of his extremely critical coverage of Israel and his refusal to support genocide Joe Biden. Chris Hedges explains in a social media post that Max Alvarez let him go because Chris Hedges' show threatened their status as a nonprofit because the coverage that Chris Hedges was doing was upsetting Real News Network's donors. The word real is doing a lot of work in the name Real News Network. If your existence as a journalist and news outlet relies on big donors and that impacts your coverage, you're not a journalist. You're a paid propagandist for the capitalist class. But Max Alvarez and Real News Network, they want to be paid propagandists for the capitalist class. So that's why they let go Chris Hedges, a award-winning journalist. Like, how do you cancel Chris Hedges of all people and think that is going to go well for you? We've seen a rise of quote-unquote progressive news outlets following George W. Bush Jr.'s administration, and then a boom of that same industry when Bernie Sanders ran 2 times in 2016 and 2020. These same progressive media outlets was rendered useless when they became infected with Trump derangement syndrome. Because of this, the main objective of progressive news outlets was to defeat Trump and to appease the anti-Trump viewer base instead of telling the truth. The good news is that we are living through the golden era of independent journalism, so Chris Hedges don't need them. The era of journalists being partisan bootlicking cheerleaders is over. Either you tell the truth and nothing but the truth, or you lose all credibility. And the Real News Network, they just lost all their credibility.
That's my brother Nick with another hotspot classic. Now let's go to YouTube here. So we're going to watch, and again, we're just going to watch the part of the firing part. And then once they pivot to Palestine, we're gonna do something. We're gonna go away, or that's where we're gonna cut it, and we're gonna cover the second part in a different stream.
Now, he won't thank me for putting it this way.
Let me pause it and set this up. All right, so let's finish, and this is the last part of the segment. Then we can move on to the next one here. Hit that like button. Don't forget to do that. Let's listen. Here is George Galloway with Chris Hedges.
But if there is a saint walking around in progressive politics anywhere today, it's Chris Hedges. A saintly, educated, calm, cool, and collected voice of experience on war and high politics, high crimes and misdemeanors. In a sane America, he'd be pretty near the president's desk at the White House. At least he'd be at Foggy Bottom as the Secretary of State. Instead, Chris Hedges has just been cancelled from yet another gig, yet another platform. But he'll never, ever be cancelled from the mother of all talk shows. Chris Hedges, welcome. Before we get on to the big stuff, the important, more important stuff like ceasefires, war, famine, pestilence, and disease? What have they done to you now?
Well, the primary funder of the Real News is a guy named T.M. Scruggs, who told the Real News that if they did anything, in his eyes, to elect Donald Trump, they would lose their funding. That is just an inverted way of saying support Joe Biden and the Democrats. I have a long history with Scruggs. He had given money to Scheer Post, the website run by Bob Scheer. I had written a column defending the writer Alice Walker against charges that she was an anti-Semite. Scruggs demanded the column be removed. He was a major donor. And then when Bob Scheer refused to remove it, he cut off all contributions to the site. So the editor of The Real News, Max Alvarez, said that I was canceled because I jeopardized his nonprofit status. That is completely untrue. What happened was I interviewed Dennis Kucinich, former member of the House, former presidential candidate, anti-war candidate, who is running for a House seat as an independent in Ohio. I did not endorse him, which would have violated nonprofits. So I did not violate the rules. And what happened was that interview was removed from the site, and then my show was immediately terminated. That's the problem with wealthy, rich people or corporations running news sites. They distort, corrupt the truth, the news, whether that's on MSNBC, where every analyst discussing the police assaults on U.S. universities for non-violent protest, arresting students for trespassing on their own campuses, come from the police agencies or the security forces. So I got caught up in it. I'll have to, establish something now that is completely independent. As you said, I was pushed out of the New York Times for denouncing the war in Iraq when the wealthy publisher of Truthdig tried to fire the editor, Bob Scheer. I organized a strike among all the staff, except for two of them. And then we were all fired. It's not a new story, but the walls are really closing in. There's just
the walls are closing in on, you got these so-called left-wing funders, the billionaires that fund these so-called left-wing projects that they always have a breaking point. They always have a line, or they can be activated to suppress by the U.S. empire. And maybe that's what happened here, because he had this Dennis Kucinich thing. This is months ago. This has been out for months. He hasn't been doing new content regularly. So this is based on past content. So that means somebody picked up the phone and said, hey, it's time to activate threat level 10. Biden is losing. We need to do something. And ergo this. Now, let's think back to what Max Alvarez said in the announcement by the Real News Network on Twitter. Oh, it wasn't that. And what did Chris just say in this video? He said, Max Alvarez said this, and that's a bold-faced lie. Essentially, that's what he said. But let's go back to how he tells the story. I just want to listen to the first 30 seconds again so you can hear the name of the billionaire and how this unfolded.
Ceasefires, war, famine, pestilence, and disease. What have they done to you now?
Well, the primary funder of the Real News is a guy named T.M. Scruggs, who told the Real News that if
T.M. Scruggs, the primary funder of the Real News Network, is T.M. Scruggs. Now, you know how, what is it? The Intercept is funded by a billionaire. All these entities are funded by these quote-unquote left-wing billionaires. But these billionaires are billionaires for a reason, and they need the U.S. empire to make money. So they're not going to go too far against the U.S. empire. They might do a little bit more than the Republicans, but that's not saying much. Let me let him finish what he was saying here.
The primary funder of the Real News is a guy named T.M. Scruggs, who told the Real News that if they did anything in his eyes, to elect Donald Trump, they would lose their funding. That is just an inverted way of saying support Joe Biden and the Democrats.
If we did anything to elect Donald Trump, I'm sorry, the Real News Network did anything to elect Donald Trump, you would lose your nonprofit. That's what happens when you're funded by a billionaire. They're able to pull rank. Now, think about that. This is what actually happened, but Max Alvarez is trying to paint a different picture. Now, based on what Chris says, him saying
they would lose their funding. That is just an inverted way of saying support Joe Biden and the Democrats. I have a long history.
So what he said earlier was supporting you must support the Biden administration, or if you do anything, this is the way he said it. If you do anything, this is how the billionaire said it. If you do anything to get Trump elected, you're going to lose your nonprofit. How do you think that's going to frame the upcoming coverage by the Real News Network? How do you think, knowing that, wow, if we do anything here to elect Trump, not necessarily if Trump gets elected, but if we do anything, if our coverage contributes to voter suppression, contributes to people not wanting to support Joe Biden and in effect electing Trump, we're going to lose our nonprofit. So how do you think their coverage is going to be? How do you think the news network is going to cover Joe Biden? How do you think they're going to cover the press? How do you think they're going to cover protest? This is a terrible blow to the Real News Network. Like, I mean, I didn't, watch and read it regularly, but when they had some stories I did, they were kind of a go-to for certain stories. I would go to them. I probably covered 3 written stories, one of which was talking about how the squad or something like that. The squad is not really living up. No, TYT is not. They move right. Which speaks to what I said earlier, where they're kind of in between. This is Max Alvarez, kind of in between regular social Democrats, what they label themselves as progressive Democrats, and people to my left, slightly to my right. I'm sorry. So he's not in between me, us, RBN, and them. He's in between. I can't even name somebody who holds that, but he's in between somewhere radical or a little bit more radical and social Democrats. And that was one of the things I saw that kind of gave me that impression was the TYT report. Them literally calling them out like this is the reporting on the Real News Network. It was like they're calling out TYT for how they've shifted right on policing, on homelessness. I covered that story myself. Let's listen to the rest of this interview.
They would lose their funding. That is just an inverted way of saying support Joe Biden and the Democrats. I have a long history with Scruggs. He had given money to Scheer Post, the website run by Bob Scheer. I had written a column defending the writer Alice Walker against charges that she was an anti-Semite. Scruggs demanded the column be removed. He was a major donor. And then when Bob Scheer refused to remove it, he cut off all contributions to the site. So the editor of the Real News, Max Alvarez, said that I was canceled because I jeopardized his nonprofit status. That is completely untrue. What happened was I interviewed Dennis Kucinich, former member of the House, former presidential candidate, anti-war candidate, who is running for a House seat as an independent in Ohio. I did not endorse him, which would have violated nonprofits. So I did not violate the rules. And what happened was that interview was removed from the site, and then my show was immediately terminated. That's the problem with wealthy, rich people or corporations running news sites. They distort, corrupt the truth, the news, whether that's on MSNBC, where every analyst discussing the police assaults on U.S. universities for violent protest, arresting students for trespassing on their own campuses, come from the police agencies or the security forces. So I got caught up in it. I'll have to, establish something now that is completely independent. As you said, I was pushed out of the New York Times for denouncing the war in Iraq when the wealthy publisher of Truthdig tried to fire the editor, Bob Scheer. I organized a strike among all the staff except for 2 of them, and then we were all fired. It's not a new story, but the walls are really closing in. There's just less and less possibility for legitimate criticism, legitimate dissent, and honest journalism.
And that's why we're all moving independent. And that's why young people watch independent. You think young people don't know that this corporate cable nonsense, these press stories are just propaganda? They do. And this is the reason, another reason why they want to get rid of TikTok is too much the information is not filtered through the US empire.